Welcome aboard the Shipshape podcast, your ultimate destination for marine wisdom and expertise. Our skilled crew, comprised of top boating journalists and experts, is committed to delivering informative and captivating content week after week. We're eager to connect with and learn from our fellow mariners, and we encourage you to share our podcast with your friends. Remember, word of mouth is our lifeblood, and if you enjoy an episode, please leave us a review on your favorite podcast platform. By doing so, you're helping us forge a robust community of mariners who can learn, collaborate, and exchange their experiences out on the water.
Welcome to the Shipshape podcast. Today, we're honoured to navigate the storied waters of a remarkable sailor's journey, Captain Sean Meagher. From being Cape Cod's youngest ever captain, helming expeditions through the elusive Northwest Passage, to his pivotal role in the glitz and grind of Below Deck, Captain Sean has carved a legacy that merges adventure with purpose. But there's more beneath the surface. A fervent advocate for our oceans, Captain Sean's tireless work against marine plastic pollution and his allegiance with global conservation initiatives make him a beacon in these changing times. So, secure your life vests and open your horizons as we dive deep into the waves of Sean's accomplishments, challenges, and visions for a healthier marine world. My name is Georgia Tyndale, and I'm a freelance writer and editor within the maritime sphere, and I am joined by Meryl.
Meryl Charette. I'm a liveaboard on a Ta-Shing Toshiba 36 in Boston, Massachusetts. So, Sean, where are you coming to us from?
Well, thank you, Meryl. Thank you, Georgia. It's a pleasure to be here on your podcast. I'm coming from Cape Cod, Hyannisport, more specifically.
Nice. Kind of a local.
Yes, I'm a local. I grew up here on Cape Cod. That's where I first learned how to sail. I was given my first sailboat by my mother when I was 8 years old. It was a laser. And without any instruction, she basically said, here's the sailboat, go sail. I mean, they'd probably throw her in jail for something like that now, but but through trial and error, I did figure out how to sail that boat.
So I have to ask, considering you've had so many experiences, which we're going to get into throughout this podcast, but what does adventure mean to you?
Adventure, it means a lot of things to a lot of people, and I know that sounds like a little bit of a vague answer to buy myself some time while I think of it, but it's true, and that comes from my background in chartering on some of the super yachts, and I'll get into a little bit of the philosophy I have on that maybe a little later in the podcast. But back to the question of adventure. I would have people that would come on board that had wildly different definitions of that. And for some people, adventure could mean trying a new restaurant that had spicy food. And that was the most adventurous thing that they've ever had. And then I've got other people where we've gone wakeboarding through ice fields in Greenland. And that was, that's, I think, a better definition of adventure. But I think adventure is anything that gets you exciting, that pushes you to an edge, and that changes you in some way for the better. At least a good adventure does. Like, I believe probably a bad adventure would be called a traumatic experience.
So before you got into the whole super yachts and being a captain, you had mentioned that your mom pretty much just let you on a sailboat. Where did this whole boating journey begin? Was your family sailors? How did that look?
So my family, two very different sides to my family. They've done a lot of different things. My mother gave me a sailboat and told me to go sailing. I think that was cheaper than a babysitter, but she was always into the retail and sales industry. She's had a wholesale company for a great many years, and she's a fashion designer. And then on my father's side of my family, my aunt was married to a gentleman named David Scudder, whose family owned a local ferry company. And I started working for that ferry company at the age of 14. Got my captain's license when I was 18 and became probably the youngest captain that company ever had, which is also astounding. Is like they gave me a boat when I was 18, and I look relatively young now, but I look like I was about 12 years old when I was running that boat. And I had one woman come up to the pilot house one time and she said, "Excuse me, son, where's your father, the captain?" And I said, "I'm the captain." And she laughed and walked out. And then I went out under the bridge wing and actually took the boat off the dock. And I heard her say, "There's a bunch of little kids running this boat."
So do you think there was something in you? Is there something kind of inherent in you that means that you were able to be the captain at such a young age? Do you think there's kind of instinctual qualities within yourself that make you fit that role well?
I've often kind of thought about this and whether there's nature versus nurture.
Yeah, of course.
I've read books on this subject. There's a great book that I just read called The Right Call by Sally Jenkins, and it looks into whether athletes are kind of born or whether they become great athletes. And I think that I was given the opportunity to drive these amazing machines at such a young age, and subsequently, I did it at an age when I didn't have a lot of understanding of consequences and a lot of fear. So I took chances on these boats because I didn't know any better. And I kept pushing them further and further and further. And I've been very lucky that I think that coupled with some basic natural ability that I had from an athletics. I mean, I'm not claiming I'm a great athlete, but you do something enough from a young age, you will become good at it in spite of any lackings of failures. So whether it was nature, whether it was nurture, I don't know. I think if I was born on a ranch in Montana, I probably would have been a great cowboy. So
right. Yeah. So talk us through some of your memorable early expeditions and journeys you did have in your career.
So again, I always tried to bring that sense of adventure even to like New England. First charter vessel that I ran was a little boat called Taipan for a gentleman named Jim Irwin. He had a fleet all over the world, and this is in the early 2000s. He called me. Actually, F. Lee Bailey called me, the famous attorney who was Jim's friend, and said, "I've got this client. He's got this boat. It's coming to New England. Would you be interested in being the captain?" And I said, the timing was perfect. I said, sure. And we had a lot of adventures on board that boat. We were anchored in Hadley's Harbor. It was only his little 65-footer, but we were anchored in Hadley Harbor, and there was a great white shark called Gretel at the time that was swimming around there, and we had some experiences with the shark, and then we made it an adventure because this trip was something so different from what these people had ever done before. It was a lot of fun. And then subsequently, he had another boat in Thailand, a 65-foot northern hull, which I arrived there right after the tsunami. I just did a YouTube video on Thailand on the Worth Avenue channel, if anyone's interested in that, with a guy named Bill O'Leary, who's the author of the Southeast Asia Pilot, and a lot of great stories there. And that was adventure because there weren't any boats up there, and the charts were sketchy, and I was able to go way up Pangna Bay and to like this Muslim village, which was on stilts, and I was one of the first yachts ever to go up there. And then I found all these little cool islands, which, now there's tours that go out to them, but you felt like you were discovering these things for the very first time. And even in Europe, when I was cruising around, I had a 1-month charter around Corsica and was able to go into every single one of the little harbors and bays and chart those out and discover those. And you discover, you don't find a lot every time you go in something, but occasionally you find a gem and you feel like you're the first person ever to discover that. And then you get to share that with the guests on board. From there, I did a charter vessel called Ohana, and we really took those adventures to a whole next level. And then I got my first real kind of expedition-y adventure boat, and that was a sailboat called Blue Gold, which we were based in Vanuatu, and it was volcanoes and sharks, and I met this just exotic-looking Fijian Indian woman who we had this just wild, passionate affair in the South Pacific, and I met her at her wedding, but anyway, the marriage didn't work out. But anyway, so that was like volcanoes and natives and guys with spears. And I spent 3 years there just doing, just pushing this sailboat harder than any vessel I've ever pushed at. I submarined that boat coming out of Auckland into 3 massive waves. We completely buried it. We did a project in Vanuatu where we built banks for the National Bank of Vanuatu and got to go to these amazing little islands. thanks to when I said build banks, essentially we built a cement platform with a satellite dish attached to a box with a computer, and people could actually go in and deposit money and enter into the computer how much they were depositing. So these very small amounts, obviously, for these little natives, but they could start bank accounts and then they could get credit. And it was it was a fun project that had a lot of altruism built into it. But we were in this one island called Solace. We were just on the kind of the edge of the Solomon Islands. So there was, and it was this volcanic, just black harbor with like saltwater crocs. And we knew there were only 6 saltwater crocodiles, and there were bull sharks in there, and there was no good place to get the equipment off. So we had to get in waist-deep black water and unload these things. And we had someone making sure that we could see all 6 crocodiles that were on the beach. If there was one missing, we didn't get into the water. But but we didn't know how many bull sharks there were. But yeah, that was a wild adventure. And then like going up volcanoes, and you can see some of the photos that I took in Vanuatu on my Instagram account, which is, ironically, Excitement Factory. That's my handle, so you can follow me there and look at some of the pictures I took. From Blue Gold, I went on board a boat, New Vita, which I kind of jumped back into the Main Street charter market, chartered in Europe and chartered into the Bahamas and in New England, had some wonderful experiences on there. And then I got Latitude, which was the penultimate vessel for charter and adventure. I met a gentleman named Anil Thadani, who actually was introduced to me by Bill O'Leary, who was, again, as I said, the author of the Southeast Asia Sea Pilot. So Billo said he's got this crazy Indian guy that wants to buy a boat. He says, and I should meet him. And I said, okay. And so anyway, we met via phone. I remember thinking to myself that if he said to me he wants to buy this yacht to go and sip cocktails in Saint-Tropez, I was going to pass, because I wanted to get back to doing stuff that were on the fringes of the world. And so anyway, the conversation I had with him kind of went like this. I said, why are you buying this boat? And it's a question that I ask all owners. And he said to me, gave me the best answer ever. He goes, I want to go on adventures and photograph wildlife. And I went, okay, I'm in. So we bought Latitude. I should say, well, he bought Latitude. I went and said, yeah, it's a good boat. It'll be fun. And we were in Fort Lauderdale, and I bought this giant map of the world from IKEA, and we hung it up in the main salon. And I said to him, I said, where do you want to go? And I was pointing to Fort Lauderdale, and he looked and he goes, well, I'd like to go to Alaska. And I said, well, all right, we can go down through the Panama Canal and up the coast to Alaska. I said, or we can go up over the top through the Northwest Passage. And he looked at the map and he looked at me and he goes, oh, we have to do that. And that's how fast we made that decision. And 14 weeks, and I put that trip together in 14 weeks. I did research, talked to an amazing captain named Phil Walsh. He was a captain of a boat called Turmoil. He'd been through Northwest Passage and a lot of the places I'd been to in the South Pacific. And flew to Cannes. I think he still is the captain of Mogambo, and met him on board there. And then we just kind of went over the chart. He gave me some pointers. One of the best pointers he gave me was, every time that you get in the tender, assume you're spending the night, which was probably a piece of advice that saved my life later on. And I'll get into that in a bit. And he said, yeah, he says, you definitely can do this. And I said, okay. And a lot of people, and I say definitely can do this because a lot of people had looked at Latitude and they go, well, it's not an expedition vessel. It's not this, it's not that. But I looked at, like, what is an expedition vessel? What are the elements? And because we didn't look like, quote unquote, an expedition vessel, we looked like a yacht, immediately were dismissed. But there was a couple of key factors that made Latitude a viable candidate to do this. Number one, it had a steel hull. Number two, it had the ability to go slow, which when you're navigating through ice is critical. And number three, it was built by VREPAC. And VREPAC, if anyone's willing to do a little research, will find out that VREPAC has built more boats that have gone through the Northwest Passages than any other yacht manufacturer out there. Now, granted, there are not that many yachts that have gone through the Northwest Passage. So we did it with Latitude. We did it the first time with Latitude. And my critics were like, oh, well, they got lucky. So we decided to do it again, this time from not east to west, but from west to east, which is harder. And it's harder for, that's a whole nother podcast. So we'll get into that later. But anyway, trust me, it's harder. And we did it. And when we did that, we became the third private boat in history ever to do it. And we were the 9th boat in history, all of history, ever to make that voyage in both directions in consecutive years. And still we had critics. So we decided to go to Svalbard and then punch within 500 miles of the North Pole, which we did the following year. And then the critics at that point were kind of like, okay, it's not a fluke. Latitude is a viable vessel that can cruise in the Arctic. And for the 2 times Northwest Passage, we won a Boat International Award. For Svalbard, we should have won another Boat International Award. We got robbed by some boat, which it was kind of like, it reminded me of when, all right, everyone knows the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, of course.
Yes, for sure.
Do you know what movie beat Raiders of the Lost Ark for the Academy Award? No one ever remembers that. If I mention it to you, you'll remember it was Chariots of Fire. And everyone's like, but it beat Raiders of the Lost Ark. But it didn't have any legs. We had legs. We were Raiders of the Lost Ark that year, and for some bizarre reason, we lost. Just on back on Boat International Awards, the Latitude was nominated in total for 3 Boat International Awards in 2 different categories: Voyager Award and also Best Refit Award, which is what we did in New Zealand. I did go on to win another Voyager Award. I took Asteria, which was a converted tug. She was built in 1969, a converted tug. And I took her from Cabo up to Alaska during the pandemic year. We won the Boat International Voyager Award for that. So I'm 2 for 4.
So I'm interested in hearing, kind of the present state of this adventure charters, right? When you came into it, what was the state of that specific type of chartering, and where is it at today?
Well, when we first started doing it, we got this after the first time we did the Northwest Passage. Cecile from Boat International contacted me and said, hey, we heard what you did. Do you mind if we do? And I think Boat International contacted us. VREPAC, I had been in contact with Marnix and those guys, and they were impressed what we did with the boat. They contacted Boat International. Boat International contacted us, and we were very open to being interviewed. Neil Thadani, owner of Latitude, he's a great interviewer or interviewee, and we started doing articles for Boat International. And then we happened to have some world-class photographers on board, Anil being one of them, John Isaac being the other, and then also Anil's cousin Ravi. And I had taken some good pictures as well. So we had great footage, and that started getting published. That started getting noticed. We were in Boat International. We were in Super Yacht Times. We were in Boot International. We were in Invictus. We were all over the place. There was actually, I don't know how this happened, but there's a ridiculous, I call it my Han Solo shot. There's a picture of me like on top of like this mountain, looking all mountaineering with great lighting. And I was dating a woman from Austria at the time, and she was mad at me for something. And Boot International had posted that picture on a billboard in the airport in Munich. And she was so mad when she saw it. She walked in and there was like me on like that. She couldn't get away from me. It was pretty funny. But subsequently, it's what that did to adventure travel was really put it in the forefront. And you had a lot of owners with boats realizing, well, wait a minute, I can go off the beaten track, and they started to. And so I don't know if Latitude started that trend or fueled fire to it, but we were definitely part of that trend. Adventure travel today, you've got companies like EOS, you've got Polaris, you've got a lot of different organizations that are focused on a vessel, Asteria, which we actually have got the boat listed for sale right now, not because the owner wants to sell it, but because we've got our eye on another vessel. That boat is available to do some amazing, amazing trips. Asteria actually was better in the ice than Latitude. Latitude, the hull was very, very efficient going through the water, so we had to go. It didn't throw a big bow wave, which is kind of critical when you're going through brash ice. So we had to go slow. Whereas Asteria had this big fat bow, and that was able to push a pressure wave so we could go quicker through heavier ice, and it's got an ice reinforced band on it. So Asteria is a great boat for adventure travel. This summer, we're hoping to offer her up for a trip to Svalbard, which Svalbard, bang for the buck, is the most accessible, fun, and I don't say easy to cruise, because that's not quite true, but it's easier to get to, easier to provision. It's got a great airport. It's only 3 hours from Oslo to Svalbard. It's got good provisioning. Anyway, we're going to be basing her up there, and we've already got several inquiries for Svalbard. And 2 weeks on September 5th, I'm doing a live webinar on Svalbard with Jason Roberts, who was the producer for Frozen Planet with David Attenborough. And he's produced tons of movies up in Svalbard and in the Arctic. So if you're interested, tune into that on the Worth Avenue channel. There's shameless plug. Sorry about that. Adventure travel. I think getting back to the definition of adventure, I think people's tastes have become spicier, and you've got charter guests that have done the Caribbean, have done the Med, that now want to experience something a little bit different. And it's a great time to really be, I wouldn't say great time to be me, but to be part of that experience.
So I run into people that work on kind of the commercial boats, the ferries that go back and forth. And there's a lot of younger guys that are working on these things, trying to become a captain. And every time I've talked to them, I'm like, you should always keep your eye out for the super yacht industry. Now, how exactly does one go from, working on a ferry to all of a sudden being involved in the super yacht industry? Is it just luck who you run into, or?
No, it's the same drive of when you hear someone that's gone from the mailroom to the boardroom. That's it. It doesn't matter if 3 days a week I'm here on the Cape. I've been doing some other projects, but I still run the high-speed ferries that go between the company that I started in 1983 when I was 14. I still run the high-speed ferries that go from, now they're high-speed, that go from Hyannis to Martha's Vineyard or Hyannis to Nantucket. And I hear guys in that job that complain, and they say, oh, I wish I could do what you did, or like, how do I get in there? I'm like, well, you just do it. And they're like, well, what do you mean? Do I just do it? I'm like, well, you got to stop talking about it, and you just got to do it. It's the same thing as if you're 100 pounds overweight. You stop eating pizza and you go to the gym. And if you want to get into the yachting industry, there are steps that you can take. The first step is getting an STC. This is like entry level if you want to be a deckhand. But say, you're 22, college wasn't for you. And how do I get into the yachting industry? I've seen it on Below Deck, which we'll get into it, and that's a good segue for in a minute. But anyway, so the first segment is you get a thing called an STCW certificate, and that's the basic entry level that you need to get on board a boat. And then with that STCW certificate, you fly to Fort Lauderdale, or you fly to Antibes or someplace where there are yachts. And then you walk up and down the dock, and you hate it. And eventually someone hands you a rag, and you go and you clean a boat. And then they say, you obviously don't know how to clean a boat. And you say, well, can you teach me? And someone says, sure. And you learn how to clean a boat. And then they're like, well, our other deckhand flaked out for today. Can you come on this trip to the Bahamas? Do you have an STCW? And it's always better to be prepared for an opportunity and not have one than to have an opportunity and not be prepared. And that's how fast it can happen. Next thing you know, you're a deckhand on board the boat. And then they say, can you drive a tender? And you say, sure, I can drive that tender. Not knowing how to drive something has never stopped me from actually driving it. It's maybe get a little instruction before you actually jump on the helm of your $1.1 million Everglades. But anyway, you learn how to drive the tender, and then you become more valuable. And then the other key thing is you do a little bit more than you're paid for. If you go in with the attitude of, I'm getting $100 a day, and you're going to just get that $100 a day out of me, you will stay like that forever. If you go in there and you give it your all, the organization that you're working for may not pay you what you're worth, but there will be an organization that will. You will get noticed. Cream rises to the top. Talent rises to the top. If you work hard in this industry, and you will get noticed. I am a shameless poacher. If I see talent on board another boat, I will steal you. 100%. And I let that know. The other captains say to me, they're like, Sean, you just stole my crew member. I'm like, yeah, offer him a better deal, or offer her a better deal. Offer her a better opportunity. And if I can't offer a better opportunity for that person, then I need to look at the programs that I manage. And that goes back to Management 101. Like when I announced that I'm crewing a boat, I never have to worry about finding crew. And that's because I've done some really amazing trips and amazing voyages, and that people want to work with me. And it's not because I'm such a great captain. It's that a lot of people that work for me then go on to do great things. And I think that's the best compliment to myself as a manager. And segueing back to like, how do you break into the industry? It's the same way you break into any industry. You show up, you do your job, you do more than what's expected. You will get noticed and you will rise through the ranks quickly. Going back to how I was made a captain when I was 18 years old, you can go back to how was I made a deckhand on board the sightseeing boat at 14 years old. And I started out in the parking lot like everyone else did, parking cars. But on my spare time, I went and I rowed the boats and I learned how to do the lines and drive the boat. And I showed up on my days off because I didn't have anything else to do when I was 14. And when someone left that boat, it wasn't who was next in line, it was who was ready. And that is the great fallacy, I think, of anything. It's like, if you're ready and you're ready to go and you are prepared for an opportunity, those opportunities will come if you're in the right place at the right time.
Yeah. I'm interested because obviously you mentioned Below Deck, and that's a great segue into what we can talk about next. But it's also, when you're talking about entry into yachting, that's a whole different element now, isn't it, of entry into yachting? Because now people have a particular image of yachting that's been painted through a reality TV show. You know, what are your sort of thoughts on that? And also, more pressingly, how did you end up? And
how did I end up on Below Deck?
Yeah.
Well, I used to joke, I used to say, Below Deck is where crew go to destroy their career and captains go to die.
Yeah.
And my opinion's a little changed for that. So how I wound up on that, well, for years, I would get emails, do you want to be on Below Deck? Way back when, Jennifer Saya was a broker for them, and they needed a itinerary for the Med. And so I wrote them an itinerary for Ischia, Naples, and Capri. And they were like, do you want any credit? And I went, no, I didn't want to be associated with the show. And to me, it wasn't a positive image. My impression of it wasn't a positive image of the industry. So years later, I got a phone call from the owner of My Sienna, and he had used the boat. That boat had been many times on Below Deck. Anyway, it was the beginning of the pandemic, and the boat was stuck in Antigua. So I get a phone call from him, and he says, hey, the boat's stuck in Antigua. I've got no one to bring it back from Antigua to Fort Lauderdale. Can you fly down and can you go down and get it? And I said, sure. I said, book me a plane ticket. And he goes, and he says, well, there's no flights flying. And I said, well, don't you have a jet? And he went, oh, yeah. So anyway, we hopped on the jet and flew down there. And within 2 hours, I had the thing underway and we were headed back to Fort Lauderdale. It was a wild time. It's like, it was people trying to get out. The pandemic stories it was like some natural disaster had befallen or something big was happening and everybody was trying to get off that particular island. It was wild. But anyway, so we get the boat underway in 2 hours, and on board the boat, they have crew members that are backstage, like the engineers and the backup captain that don't appear on the show. John was he was the first officer on there, and you never saw him. You just saw Eddie the bosun. But anyway, so I talked to him about it, and there was one production assistant that was there as well. And my impression of the show kind of changed a little bit. I was like, I was a little intrigued. So I get the boat to Fort Lauderdale, and pulling into Lauderdale, we didn't know what to expect with all the pandemic and everything being shut down. But we pull in, and it looked like the 4th of July. It was like there was the saying, it was like in Florida, I'm like, there was no pandemic in Florida. And like Florida was just open for business. There was boats everywhere. So I get the boat to LMC, and then I literally hop in an Uber and then go to the airport and get on a JetBlue. And I'm sitting on board the JetBlue flight, and I get this email, and it says, do you want to be on Below Deck? And I went, what haven't I done? I've had an amazing career. And I thought, all right, what the heck? I'll see what they have to say. So I emailed them back, and then my phone rings, and they were like, really? And I said, yeah. And so that started an interview process, which is actually quite extensive. They don't just randomly pick people off the street. There's a lot of psychological tests to just make sure that you can handle the pressure. They really actually do vet their people before they get on board the boat. So don't really hear from them for a while. And then they said they offered me an opportunity to do one of the other shows. And I said, I really don't even want to do Below Deck. I said, what I want to do is Below Deck Adventure. And so I pitched that show for them, which they promptly stole and did a version of it in Norway. And people have said to me, well, why didn't you, sue him or go after him for stealing your idea? And I said, well, that would admit that they executed the idea well enough where it was something to go after. But it was a lousy show, and it was not the show that I pitched to them. I pictured them something truly adventurous. Anyway, and that's a great segue into another project which I'm working on, which we can talk about a little further on in the podcast. But anyway, back to Below Deck. So I found myself again delivering my Sienna down to St. Kitts, and delivered it down there. Captain Lee had a medical issue where he couldn't appear for the show, so I jumped on board the boat for an episode and a half. There was a ton of stuff that you didn't see on that episode. It was funny. It was a better crew than they kind of got portrayed as. And we really started to get a little momentum right when Lee showed up, and then I left. And there was there's kind of a motivational talk that I give to every crew on board if I come on board that's new. And they only left in one little bit, and it was the bit where I say, I am not very good at cracking the whip, but I'm excellent at swinging an axe. And if you're not working out, I'm not going to yell at you. I'm just going to fire you. And that was it. That was all that they showed. And they showed these shocked expressions on their face. And what that really meant is that if you don't want to be there and you're not doing your job, I'm not going to berate you for it. I'm not a micromanager. I'm just going to say, it's just not working out. We need to make a change, and it's easier on everyone. I got accused of being a micromanager on board that show, and my response to that was that there was 100 other projects that were happening while I was doing the beach setup. And the difference is that the beach setup was my project. So you did not see me micromanaging my crew. You saw me managing my own project. And that's the difference. Anyway, that was Below Deck. That was Below Deck. People always used to say to me, they're like, oh, was it fabricated? Did they tell you? I'm like, no, the drama is real. They don't fabricate anything. That's them on the show, being idiots or being heroes.
Yeah,
so
I think what you've identified is, even if it's not fabricated, though, it's all, as Meryl and I can attest to, it's all in the editing, right?
It's all in the editing.
Yeah, exactly. So even if it's not fabricated, how you show to depict something, where you put it in the episode, what the context is, you can lead to a lot worse situations than your particular one that was taken out of context, can't it? Really?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But I got to admit, it was fun. What was not fun was being on St. Kitts, because I had to stay there for the whole shoot in case Lee dropped dead or had another medical incident or something. And that was rough because I was in isolation for literally like 6 weeks. Again, if you look at my Instagram, you'll see some great photographs of monkeys, which I took on St. Kitts, and I was able to get those close shots because they accepted me as one of their own. I became one of the monkey tribe by offering them food, and they were my only companions shooting up Below Deck. Can see why those guys stuck on desert islands get a little crazy, but
Yeah.
Anyway.
So we've touched on Below Deck, but I think it's probably important that we also talk about your outreach and advocacy in terms of ocean conservation, because in terms of messaging about yachting in the marine space, that's a very different way of getting the word out there, isn't it? That's a very different focus. So how are you involved in conservation work, and how, if at all, has Below Deck helped in terms of spreading awareness of the stuff you're up to?
Yeah, actually, one of the things that's funny I pitched is part of Below Deck Adventure was an environmental aspect of that show. It's like rather than showing the crew going out and getting wasted at night, let's show them doing a beach cleanup, or showing them, how we're recycling or saving a sea turtle or something. That actually really happens on a regular basis. This industry, I've said this a lot, and I've spoken at a lot of different organizations, Repack being one of them. They do a Rethink Night Out, and I was there last November talking specifically about plastics in the ocean and initiatives that they have of doing beach cleanups. And they actually do a kit that any yacht can You just call Repack up. They'll send it to you for free. North Sails made these bags and these special containers that are super easy to use. Every yacht should have them because you can come up and do a quick beach cleanup. They fold up. You can bring it back to the boat or whatever. And there's a QR code of where to go to get rid of the plastics. Anyway, it's a really neat kit. But what I've often said is that this industry is often associated with excess and wastefulness. And there are elements of that. And that does those are kind of the things, those are some of the few of the takeaways from a show like Below Deck or the more sensational stories that you see in the news. But in reality, you get companies like Ocean Co., like FedShip, like Lursen, that have amazing initiatives to not only make their boats more efficient, but their shipyards more efficient, that their use in plastic goes down, that they use heat pumps, that they put solar panels on top of their sheds. And that is really in response to the type of owners that are buying these yachts, that want vessels that are more efficient, that are greener, that aren't going to be associated with excess, but with really cutting edge technology. So Below Deck's giving me a platform. It's giving me more people that follow me on Instagram, that people that actually listen to me. There's that show I do on Tuesday nights on the Up and Adam channel called Anchor Watch, and we review Below Deck, ironically, but I come on the show and talk really about more real world issues, and one of them, of course, being the environmental stuff. I'm also the marine and military advisor for a couple different companies, one being a company called Engineered Fluids, and they make what's called a single phase dielectric fluid. And what that means is single phase means it stays in one state of matter. It's always a liquid. And dielectric means that it's non-conductive, and it's used in making batteries safer on board vessels and in immersion cooling of electronics. To just give you an example, a lot of the data centers, the biggest cost on those data centers is electricity, and the biggest waste product is water. They need the water, obviously, to get rid of the heat, and they need power to make all that happen. Whereas if you use a dielectric fluid and immersion cool the electronics, you save literally millions of dollars on these large data plants, and you also save millions and millions of gallons of water. So that's the type of tech that I'm interested in. If you want to learn more about that, you can go to engineeredfluids.com. The other initiatives that I'm looking at right now is I'm talking to just recently having a discussion with a couple of very smart individuals. One, he's a neuroscientist and computer scientist in Monaco, specializing in AI, a PhD professor at Mass Maritime in charge of simulation and all sorts of stuff. And then another scientist at Johns Hopkins, and we're looking into designing an AI autopilot. And that AI autopilot will do a lot of different things. Obviously, it'll help you help the crew make better decisions on board. But when it comes to fuel efficiency, you can really, really dial in a boat in a course, because it will take into account course changes thousands of miles away, because all these vessels would be linked. So rather than doing bigger course changes here and course changes there, and over a period of like a voyage of 1,000 miles, you might add 50 miles in bad navigation on that. That might be a bit of an exaggeration, but extrapolate that over thousands of vessels, and now you've all of a sudden saved millions of gallons of fuel. And that's the type of tech and the type of stuff that I like to be involved in. There's a few other projects that I've been asked to be involved in, designing interfaces for some really advanced vessels that use power more efficiently, that use technology more efficiently, and all to make the boats just kind of cleaner and greener.
Ahoy, investors! Are you on the lookout for a unique opportunity to invest in a thriving industry? Set your sights on Shipshape, the innovative platform connecting boat and yacht owners with top-notch marine service providers. Our team is committed to revolutionizing the marine repair and refit market in North America. But we can't sail these seas alone. With your support, we can enhance our platform and create a significant impact in the industry. Don't let this exciting investment opportunity drift away. Contact us today to learn more about joining our voyage. Reach out to us at info@shipshape.pro.
One of the things that I've noticed in marine and maritime, right, is it's like a color wheel. And each segment is its own color, whether it be aquaculture, super yachts, blue economy, recreational boating. And no one really communicates cross-sector. And so no one really knows what each other is working on. And, I run into environmental groups all the time and, they're like, oh, well, what could we change? I'm like, you don't have a single person that's in the super yacht industry. And their head explodes. They're like, how could super yacht be at all connected with innovation or climate impact? So can you talk on that a little bit?
Yeah, so that's great that you brought that up. Is like I've really worked in the industry to try to break down those barriers, being both on the commercial side and on the super yacht side. And kind of on the science side, I have dialogues with Kathy Metcalf. She's the head of the Chamber of Commerce for the American Bureau of Shipping. Then I talk to Marnix from VREPAC, and then I'll talk to scientists at Woods Hole University. And we're all kind of working on the same problems. But you're right. There's no good bridge. There's the television show that I'm developing right now. Oddly enough, I hope it'll serve as that bridge. Whereas it will incorporate science and technology into the type of adventure cruising that we're doing, and also into the marine conservation, and showing the positive sides of the yachting industry. Even the word like the yachting industry has kind of snooty Thurston Howe III kind of connotations, and I think it's part of a much larger ecosystem. I think the maritime tourism industry, I think, is and this being at the high end, I think can really have some positive stuff. But what the bridge for that is podcasts like you're doing, the television or the television shows. The television is an antiquated term, but whether it's YouTube or a streaming service or what have you, that vehicle to bring these industries together, and social media. I think we live in an ecosystem. We live in a world where there's so much information coming at you that the way to insulate oneself and not be overwhelmed is to form up in tribes, and that can have negative kind of connotations. But if we think of ourselves as kind of like more of like a beehive where everyone's bringing in little bits of honey and pollen, little bits of pollen from all over the place. We can create something that's pretty magical. And I only bring up that analogy because I just read a book by Seth Godin called Song of Significance, which I also recommend that book. And Seth Godin, and it is about how collaboration. Also, Seth Godin did the Climate Almanac, which I also recommend that you look at as well. And he brought a bunch of people together to look at, like, climate scientists, business, anybody. It's this giant open source project to bring people together, to bring information for a common goal. But again, back to segueing is like, what can we do to bring it all together? I think it's just having people within the industry like myself, like yourself, that are looking at it at an overall global problem and not falling into tribalism.
So over the years, you've seen the firsthand effects of human activities on the oceans. Can you give us kind of an example of what you've seen through your time on the ocean?
Yeah, I've seen some, give you two fairly recent examples. In 2008, I was in Vanuatu on Blue Gold, and I dove this reef north of Afate, and it was a spectacular little reef, and it was breeding ground for young tropical fish. So you had a bunch of baby fish, like a bunch of little baby Nemos and all these things, and the coral was alive, and it was vibrant, and it was just a magical little dive. And I was in Vanuatu at a time when, too, it was like still not a lot of boats were going there. And I went back in 2016, just 8 years later, and went to dive on that same reef, and it looked like the surface of the moon. It was just, the coral was bleached and was dead. There wasn't a single fish. It was really, really disheartening. And there are several things that caused that. One, the worst case, the biggest cause of that was that in China, there's a market globally, there's a market for tropical fish. But you would have the Chinese were going in there, and I'm not blaming the Chinese. I mean, I think they're just taking advantage of a market. But they would go in there and they would harvest all the little baby fish. And how they would do that is that the easy way to catch that fish is to go down there with a gallon of bleach and open the bleach underwater, and the fish swim into it, and it stuns them, and then they scoop them up, and then they whisk them away. Well, that bleach has got to go somewhere. It went and killed all the coral, which then killed the breeding ground for that area. And that's just one example. That's an extreme example. But other examples where I've seen reefs go, and this is from ocean acidification, sunscreens, you name it, pollutants is just killing reefs all over the world. I had a conversation recently with a scientist whose job for NOAA is looking at reefs. He's at the NOAA Center in Key West, Florida, and they've been successful in kind of replanting these reefs that have been destroyed by all, like, whether natural or unnatural causes. And he was one of the world's leading experts on that. And he's seen the same thing too. It's like globally, it's like these reefs are just dying. A lot of that I think can be attributed to, again, rising sea temperatures that are just killing the reefs, but a lot of it is just chemicals in the water that also kill them as well. And that's one example. In the water, on land, we were up in Iceland, and we took a helicopter and we were flying around Iceland, and we landed at the base of this glacier. And the helicopter pilot said to me, he goes, "This was where the glacier was 30 years ago. And from there, it had receded in 3 miles." So he remembers when he was a kid coming to this particular glacier. And then today, where it's 3 miles further back. And now glaciers naturally recede. But the disturbing fact about that was that prior to that, it took 1,000 years for that same glacier to recede for 3 miles. So there's very clear evidence that the world is changing. Now, do we need to just go, oh no, the world is ending, and stick our heads under a rock and everything? Well, no, of course not. The other flip side of that argument has been, oh, the world's been changing forever. You know, at one point, Cape Cod was under a giant sheet of ice. I mean, there were oceans in the middle of the U.S. And yeah, that's true. Over a billion years or over hundreds of thousands of years, the Earth has undergone a lot of changes. But what's happened now is that things are accelerating at an extreme pace that hasn't been seen ever in history. And there's science to back that up. It's not just something that I've read about. I've actually talked to scientists. I've asked their opinions. I've been to the places where reefs are being killed. I've been to these glaciers that have receded. You know, it's funny, every now and then I'll run across a client denier, and they'll say, "Well, you've never been to the North Pole." And I go, "Well, actually, yes, I have." You know, and I've seen plastic at the North Pole. I've seen these glaciers recede. I've seen these reefs dead. So yeah, no, I have seen these things with my own eyes. They are actually happening. But, you know, human beings are incredibly resilient. I think that because of this, new technologies will be invented. I think that as humans adapt to this change, I'm very optimistic for space exploration. You look at like what happened in Europe, it got overcrowded, and then people discovered the Americas. I mean, as human beings, we're born to explore. It's in our DNA. I think there's a segment of the population that gets uncomfortable with too many people around, or gets uncomfortable with these problems, and then we'll find a way to come up with interesting and innovative solutions. And ocean exploration and the science that comes out of that are a big part of the puzzle, which will help change the world for a better.
Wow, I mean, that was a pretty good one, Georgia.
I was just going to say, I think that's a fantastic note to start wrapping things up, really. So it's you've done a lot, you've experienced a lot. We've only really been able to touch on just some of your experiences. But in terms of your perspective of the environment, yachting, the whole maritime space, would you say you were largely optimistic or pessimistic about sort of the future of the industry?
I'm always optimistic, which is why people put me on their podcasts and their shows. It's just like, you know, if I was on here and just, you know, basically, well, Sean, what do you think? It's like, well, we're all going to die.
You'd be surprised, Sean. That's another way of doing it.
We're not all going to die. Of course not. But on one note, like one of the best talks I ever gave was followed by one of the worst talks I ever gave. It was both were in Holland. I gave one talk at VREPAC, and it was on every vessel can be an exploration vessel. I didn't like the format. It was anyway, I sucked.
Was that at the rethink thing you were talking about
That was
earlier?
at the rethink. That was the first time I did it. And then
Yeah.
I redeemed myself in Dubai a few months later. But anyway, that talk sucked. But the next day, I did a talk at the Super Yacht Reports.
The Super Yacht Forum at Metz Trade in Amsterdam.
Yes. And that's where I did the talk on the perfect customer journey. And were you there at that one?
No, I wasn't, but I'll be there at this year's one. So will there be a repeat performance?
Well, I don't know. Go talk to
Martin.
Go talk to Martin. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
so no, but what I said was, and I think this will be the best or something good to end on, was I used to joke that what we do, it's not like we're curing cancer, being in the yachting industry. And then I changed my tune to that, and I'll tell you how that came about. Is I did a charter on board New Vita, and this was in the Med. And it was for a Russian family, and we picked up this Russian family, and the principal he's a typical big Russian guy, and he comes on board and he was gruff. Well, anyway, about 3 days into the trip, he's still of kind of this black cloud demeanor, and I went up to him and I said, is everything okay? Are you enjoying the trip? And he goes, oh, it's not you. He goes, I just got a lot on my mind. And I said, well, you want to talk about it? He said, yeah. He says, I run the largest car factory in the world. He says, I have over 300,000 employees. And when I get back, I have to lay off 20,000 of them. And this really bothered him, that 20,000 people that he was responsible for were going to lose their jobs. So we continued on with the vacation and on with the charter. And the goal I found of most of these trips, especially when the guys that show up with their families, is that they're under such tremendous pressure at work. What they're hoping for is to reconnect with their family, is to rekindle maybe some romance with their wives, to reconnect with their children, and to kind of remind themselves of why they're doing what they're doing. So anyway, this particular trip, we kill it. We had like this band come on board, do this impromptu song in Sardinia. They were great. And we had made this massive kind of fun water park for like him and the kids. And we had sailboat races, remote controlled sailboat races. And it was one of those charters that just went off without a hitch. And by 10 days into the charter, he was a changed man. He was tan, he was laughing, he was relaxed, the guy was sleeping. We had really, really done our jobs. And so the charter ended in Monaco, and we're pulling into the harbor, and he's up in the pilot house. And he says to me, he goes, I think I figured out a way to keep those 20,000 people employed. And I said, that's fantastic. He says, yeah. He says, I'm really happy about that. And I said, great. And you can see this great weight taken off his shoulders. And that's when I realized is that we may not cure a cancer of the body, but what we do is cure a cancer of the soul. And when you do that for the 1% of the 1%, magic things happen. Disney is predicated upon taking people out of their mundane lives, and they can go to Disney, they can go back to the factory or whatever they're doing and have a better outlook on life. It takes the stress off them. And that's great, and it makes them better workers. But like I said, if you do that for the 1% of the 1%, really magical things happen. In this regard, this guy, because he was able to be able to reconnect with his family, maybe rekindle some romance with his wife, and also experience the real kind of natural beauty of the Mediterranean, he was able to think clearly and come up with a creative solution to keep those people employed. Now, extrapolate that over all these different people on all these different boats and all these owners that really, really have their fingers on the pulse of geopolitical world of global events. And you get an industry now that's saying you can have a cleaner and a greener boat, that you can have better management principles, that you can have all these things, and you can show them that it's working in action, and you can bring them to places in the world that are worth saving. And then they go back into the world with like a renewed vigor, with a renewed optimism that I can really do something, that I can make my companies more efficient, that I can actually figure out creative ways to keep people employed, that I don't have to, dump toxic waste in Mexico if that's your business or whatever. You show that this planet is worth saving. You show that there is a mechanism to do that. And you've done something magical, and now you've cured like this great depression. You've cured this great malaise. You've truly, truly changed the world. And that is the industry that we are really in.
Well, Sean, where can people find you and read more about what you're doing?
You can find me, the best way to get in touch with me is on my Instagram, which is Excitement Factory. You can follow some of my adventures on the Worth Avenue Yachts YouTube channel. I've done a couple of webinars on chartering in some really cool exotic locations. And finally, most Tuesday nights on the Up and Adam channel on YouTube on Anchor Watch. You can find me there live. I'm hosting a seminar at the Monaco Yacht Club during the Monaco show at our Captain's Forum on what classification societies are, basically how to I probably should know what I'm talking about since I'm hosting the seminar, but it's a little bit of a broad subject. Essentially, it's like we're looking at the future of propulsion systems in yachting and how classification societies will be able to understand and classify them. So it's kind of a technical subject, but an important subject because there's some really cool tech that's going to be coming out soon in different ways, completely different ways that we're going to be thinking about how we propel yachts, how we power them, how we do everything. And the Monaco Yacht Club is such a great organization that they're really at the forefront of a lot of that. So that in a nutshell. Oh, and then possibly now that I'll definitely see if you guys are at the Newport Yacht Show, we'll see you there.
Sounds good, Sean. Well, it was great talking to you. Awesome conversation.
Check back every Tuesday for our latest episode. And be sure to like, share, and subscribe to Shipshape.pro.